I want to introduce the first panel, an outstanding panel really, on pulse innovation. And I'm going to introduce your moderator. Chris Lannon joined the McGill Center for the Convergence of Health and Economics in 2012 as the managing director. Chris has extensive experience in technology commercialization, having worked as a biotech industry consultant and as a scientist developing products for a stem cell biological sciences company. Prior to joining the MCCHE, wow, that is a handle, Chris, I'm telling you. He worked as an associate director of a boutique investment bank in Montreal. He is treasurer and a director of Action Against Hunger in Canada. And he holds a PhD in cancer biology from the University of British Columbia and an MBA from McGill University. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for this panel, Chris Lannon.
Thanks so much, Tim, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Perhaps we should have had Marilyn here again this morning to be a bit more of a draw, but we do appreciate you being here nonetheless. We're very delighted to talk to you this morning about, I think, a great initiative called the Pulse Innovation Platform that we've been assembling over the last 2 years. Excuse me. The Pulse Innovation Platform, or PIP as we call it, will become the convening body for pulse-based food innovation globally, bringing solutions to challenges at the interface of farm, food, and health systems. PIP is an open forum, a pre-competitive forum where members network and connect to identify bottlenecks hindering their own innovation and develop solutions for themselves and for society that goes beyond what individual members can develop themselves. We're delighted to pre-launch this platform at the CISL's meeting this week, and would like to do so with a panel presentation entitled Pulse Innovation Platform, Farm and Food-Based Solutions for Health and Wealth. Our agenda today is we have a series of excellent panelists with very distinguished biographies. I'll apologize right now that I don't have extensive biographies for all of these distinguished panelists, so we'll have to go with name and title, and my apologies for that. Our format is a brief overview or discussion points from each of our panelists, around 5 to 7 minutes in length, which will hopefully become a platform or a springboard for an active discussion. We recognize that perhaps in the confines of this very large room, perhaps a discussion might be challenging, so I would encourage you, if you would like to, please come to a little bit closer, so hopefully we can engage in a discussion at the end of this session. I'd like to call upon the first panel presenter, Professor Laurette Dube, who will give an overview of the core activities of the Pulse Innovation Platform. Laurette?
I'm Laurette Dube. I'm a chaired professor in marketing at the Desautels Faculty of Management, and the founding chair and scientific director of this MCCHE that is so difficult to pronounce. I would like briefly to give you a context of this Pulse Innovation Platform within the approach that we have been developing, not just at McGill, around the world, about this food convergence innovation. And yesterday, as I was listening to the presentations and the discussion that were all about how much you grow in the field and how much you can get as outcome, whether it is wealth or whether it is food security, between the farm and its outcome, there is 3 things that underline, 4 things, in fact, that underline our approach. Between farm and wealth, or farm and nutrition and health, there is first food. So our platform is about food as not a neglected way, but the whole food innovation hasn't been working close enough with agricultural production, and be willing to revisit a bit where is it we create value. So food, behavior, human behavior, a food has to be put in someone's mouth, whether you are hungry, or whether you are obese, or whether you are healthy. So part of our approach is really to bring the best of the science of what we know of human behavior and decision-making in order to help not just innovate, but innovate or even help building demand for the existing stuff in a way that is nutritious and commercially viable. So we talk about food, we talk about behavior. The last is business. We are having the food business industry is a very key driver of economic activity with you in agriculture. And too often, when you look at the problem of nutrition, the two sides of the problem of nutrition, where we look at undernutrition, I would say that food business and how they can collaborate differently with development, with health, and with agriculture hasn't been used enough. And on the other side, they are more or less blamed to be the devil that has brought about obesity and NCD and so on. And there's, in my view, neither completely God nor completely devil. So this platform is about bringing food industry in reinventing the way we create wealth in this industry, so that our platform is about commercially successful, nutritious food product. And when I talk about industry, it is not just a big corporation. It is also, I think the farm is one of the key business that can be connected in very, very interesting way with the whole local economy and small and medium enterprises. So when we talk about supporting businesses, it's supporting your farm business, but also the full spectrum from the SME to the larger corporation. And the last part is that you don't do this if you don't also transform what's happening on the social and the health side and play at the policy level. So our platform is about targeting behavioral change at the level of the individual consumer in a way that help scale up nutritional, commercially successful nutrition innovation, but also, and more importantly maybe once someone realizes it, to help address healthcare, bringing in seriously the farm and food-based solution. So we have been, I don't know if the slides is up there, you can see who has been working for the last 2 years, and I had not seen Gavin since we were all at Bellagio, when Cecile was starting to plan the Year of Pulse, and we were starting to plan this whole convergence innovation and PIP. But so far, if you look at who has been involved in this, it's all of you in the pulse industry, and Gordon has been a core driver working with us on that. It's also the CGIAR network. IFPRI, World Bank has been involved, and we have been recruiting FAO for this panel and hope to keep them. And we have worked closely with 3 important B2B, business-to-business marketing, Buller, Firmenich, and DSM, one in processing farming, one in flavor and ingredient, and one on the nutrition. We will be between now and the formal launch in November, when the Year of Pulse is being declared or formally open. We will have recruited also food businesses that we believe have already seriously mainstreaming nutrition and health at the core of their business strategy and innovation. And there are essentially 4 activities that we will be doing, both in supporting the Year of Pulse, but the year after, most importantly. The first one is building capacity for behavioral, community, and market insights to support the innovation as well as the building supply and demand, with a focus on demand for pulse-based solution. The second part is the innovation itself. And here there are two facets that I want to talk about. We are involved with India in the competition, the school competition that the overall Year of Pulse is organizing. In India per se, we are in advanced discussion to have a 200K competition for small and medium enterprise for nutritious, commercially successful, or promising to be commercially successful innovation. And we are planning to have a global off-the-shelf technology of any type that could scale up pulse-based solution. That's the second part. And in this innovation, my colleague Phil Donne will talk about also the support that the platform is to give to businesses in leading to commercially successful innovation. And the third part, all the pulse industry, you have done an excellent job in, over the last 2 years, going to what it takes to get to a global branding. And one of the very important role that PIP can do, both at global and national level, is really to work to see how can this open brand be really taken up, not just on the commercial side by those who will be increasing pulse in their innovation pipeline, but we are using what I call my mafia on the medical and nutrition and public health to see to what extent can we get one day on this side where we are all trying to impact the same behavior, can we also use the method that we know work very well in impacting human behavior. So we will be working at finding novel way to use the branding on the social side. And the last part is the ecosystem and the policy transformation. So I will end here, and I want to say how pleased we are to be here, and we are looking forward to work with all of you.
Okay, fantastic. We've got the slide that Laurette was referring to up on the screens right now. Laurette, in session yesterday, we were talking about the importance of innovation and where we go from agriculture to health. And I think you said it so correctly that food is the intermediary between agriculture and health. And this is really recognizing the importance of food innovation, its impact that it can have globally, not just on health, but also on wealth as well, and as a vehicle for real change. And we're very excited about what we're building with some of you with PIP to date. For the rest of you that haven't been involved to date, well, we'd like to have you involved too, so let's chat some more. Let's go to the beginning point. Let's go to the farm right now. I'd like to call on Lee Moats, who is a lentil farmer from Ricetown, Saskatchewan, to provide a few remarks on how food innovation will impact farming. Lee?
Okay, thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. And that's a very good question, how food innovation would impact us on the farm. And I'll start by saying, reflecting a little bit on some comments that we heard yesterday about change. And I think the line was that change is inevitable, but progress is optional. And I'm intrigued with this whole idea of change, because sometimes on the farm we're thinking a little bit like we're stuck in time. On our farm, which is 105 years long now, the third generation, we have this great opportunity to look back and reflect on where we've come from. And in our case, looking at how our farm looks and looking at what we do, it is quite remarkable, the intergenerational change from my grandparents when they settled there just after the turn of the 20th century to when my parents came back in the middle 1900s, and now to where we're about, hopefully, to change to the fourth generation. And that change is reflected in equipment. It's reflected in the practices that we have, and also the crops that we grow. Interestingly enough, on our farm, my wife and I grow almost none of the crops that my parents grew. And my parents grew a very different suite of crops than what my grandparents did. And so thinking about innovation is a way, I guess, of thinking how farmers have to change to capture the full value of innovation that can come back to the farm. And I think one of the main changes in behavior for us on the farm is our attitude towards what we produce. It was just mentioned that there's a linkage between agriculture and food and health. Most of us on the farm have tended to think that we're producers of commodities, of wheat and canola and pulses. And increasingly, I think we're starting to make the connection that we as farmers are producers of food. And it's an important thing to make that connection, because I think on the farm, we are very able and willing to change our operations to make progress if we know what it is that we should change to. And so market signals in the future are very important for us to be able to adapt our farming systems. And I'll just reflect for a moment and say, on our farm, we are very much reflecting what the market is demanding. If we look at canola, which is one of our principal crops on our farm, there is a demand for specialty oil canola that has the right amino acid profile, and we grow that. We happen to grow Cargill specialty oil canola, but we were very quick to jump on that market opportunity. And the same is true for barley. If we choose to grow barley, where the barley that you want to grow is malt barley, because that's where the premium is. And that requires a certain group of production practices to generate barley with a low enough protein that it'll be suitable for malt. And in wheat, it's exactly the opposite, because it's about high protein in wheat. So we know that we can adapt to those kind of things. And when we look at pulses, I think farmers are very responsive to the signals that we get now about size and shape and color. And we would be more than happy to respond to innovations that give us the signal that we want to produce more protein or more starch. We would explore, I think, the practices that would be required to generate those kind of qualities. And also, as some of you will be aware, in Canada, producers invest heavily in plant breeding and developing practices for production. And I think we would be very quick to do our part of the innovation in directing our funds towards the kind of qualities that these innovations would require or demand. So back to the front, if change is inevitable, hopefully on the farm, we can make these linkages with the end use, with the food and with the health, and make progress doing our part to generate improvements in human health.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that. Those very eloquent remarks on what has to happen at the farm level. Moving on, in the interest of time, let's jump ahead to the food side. And certainly, we heard, I think, some very interesting perspectives early on in the week from General Mills in particular about some of the innovations that have to happen at the manufacturing level in order to encourage more pulses to be used in consumer packaged goods. We have a consumer packaged goods expert on our panel, Phil Donne, who's former CEO of Kellogg Canada and Campbell Canada. Phil, I'd like to turn the attention to you right now and perhaps get some thoughts on what can food companies, and food companies being both large multinationals as well as the SMEs, what can they take as well as contribute to PIP?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Chris. Before I get into that, I thought I might answer questions some of you may have as to why exactly am I here on this panel. And it really goes back to a story about 5 years ago where I was down in the Dominican Republic with a friend from work doing some volunteer work. And we broke for lunch, and had the local lunch, which was rice and beans, sometimes with chicken, sometimes with no chicken. And we realized at that point, based on our food science background, that if you mix pulses with whole grains, you actually get a complete amino acid profile. And we realized we could make that type of product at Campbell's. And that put us on a journey whereby we met up with McGill at a think tank, where we actually crystallized the concept of creating a meal based on the combination of pulses and whole grains to get that complete amino acid profile, providing great nutrition, great access, incredible variability in terms of being able to adapt to different palates. So that got me to the point of being involved in this panel. So if you're wondering why I was here, that's why I'm here. With regards to the Pulse Innovation Platform, I think it's an exciting concept that offers a lot for both large corporations, that I'll get to in a second, but importantly for small and medium enterprises. I'll start with small and medium enterprises because based on my role both at Campbell's and Kellogg's, I had the opportunity to visit food technology centers both in Canada and across Europe. And one thing that really aligned all of those, or it was a common factor across those food technology centers, is wonderful people, very dedicated, working with excellent equipment, making great innovative products. However, there really was a theme that carried across them, is that they really had difficulty making them commercially successful over time. And I tell a story of seeing amazing display cases filled with products with uniformly bad packaging. Great ideas, bad packaging, not going to be able to affect the consumer. And that was only one example of where these food technology centers, which weren't focused on commercialization, fell down. So I think for the small and medium enterprise, really what the Pulse Innovation Platform can provide is the ability to leverage an incredible array of resources to get that commercialization focus, so that you don't have the situation where you have a product package that's not going to meet the market demands in terms of creating attention at shelf, or you're not going to be missing the important retail dynamics about where should the product be shelved, how should it be promoted. What is conceived within the Pulse Innovation Platform is access to that broad array of resources that are required to not guarantee, but increase the probability that you're going to have a successful commercialization of your innovation. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost because there's so much time and effort put in the upfront creation or invention process that sometimes some corners are cut, some budgets are shaved when you're actually at the most important part, which is getting this product in the marketplace where it can be communicated, promoted, shelved, et cetera. So I think that's a critical part of what the Pulse Innovation Platform can provide for innovation. I think as well, the other aspect that's critical is being positioned to be able to access what Laurette referred to in her presentation, the whole aspect of what's available in broader society, support from policy, support from the nutrition and dietetic community as you're actually developing these products. So for the small and medium enterprise, I think it's a great opportunity to essentially replicate the kinds of resources that I was able to exploit, if you will, when I was in a position of leadership at both Campbell's and Kellogg's, whereby all of those key areas of commercialization were in-house, whether that would be innovation, development, manufacturing optimization, logistics planning, marketing and advertising communication, packaging. People in the role that I was in are able to control all of those and have all those in-house. Not easy to do when you're in a small and medium enterprise, to have all those resources at hand, but also to have the level of expertise required to give you the greatest probability of having a successful commercialization. So I think it's important to recognize for that smaller and medium enterprise the types of access you can get through the Pulse Innovation Platform that's being created. So having said that large corporations have that kind of access, maybe the advantages to a large corporation aren't as obvious in a Pulse Innovation Platform. If you have all these resources, why would you need to work with a structure such as the Pulse Innovation Platform? Well, I think the key one would be this access to the broader policy framework that I touched on earlier, that also the small and medium can access. Because I think having a collaboration at the ground level with policymakers, governmental agencies, nutrition and dietetic bodies, is going to clear the path for you in a way that is going to remove any unforeseen circumstances. And I could say from my experience, some of the things that would set you on a challenge in a big company is not having that collaboration up front. And by having a coalition of the willing within the Pulse Innovation Platform, you can really smooth out that platform, but importantly, optimize it with the access to all of those resources that will be available. And that's part of what will accelerate you being able to get to market. So many products are thwarted in the approval process, whether it be for claims, whether it be for market access. So for a large corporation, being part of the Pulse Innovation Platform ensures that you'll have access to that up front. I think as well, a key area that Chris touched on and apparently was covered with General Mills' presentation is access to emerging technology with regards to processing parameters, perhaps as protein extraction, whereas you may have great resources in your own organization, they could be a mile wide but only an inch deep. I think we have the opportunity here with the Pulse Innovation Platform to get the leading edge technology by working with leading edge technology companies such as the Buehlers and the Firmenishes, so that you don't have to create it in-house, but you can tap into it in kind of an open source network. And that also will accelerate the opportunities for big companies. And I think, again, in my own experience, you can have a very insular view of your technology. You want to make sure you exploit the capital you have, and many times you knock your head against the wall far too many times, whereas the best idea is actually to reach out to a network of collaborators to be able to accelerate that. So I think that's an important opportunity for a big company to be part of an innovation platform. And I think lastly, another thing that's shared with the small and medium enterprise is being able to access that dietetic and nutrition community on a broader basis, because not only will they help you pave the way and make a smoother launch by having people cheering you on rather than actively looking to find cracks in your foundation. And that's going to be critical. And not only from your own country that you work in, but if you're a global corporation, being able to access that nutrition and dietetic community on a global basis where some of the entries into consumer understanding are very nuanced. So I think that's going to be a very important part of it. So overall, I think as someone who came from big food, I certainly can see opportunities for small and medium enterprises by being part of a Pulse Innovation Platform. But I think it would be unwise as a large corporation to think that you can pave the way forward on a brave new world of pulses on your own. And I think it'd be very advantageous to become part of the network that's been created. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for setting the foundation for a discussion on the importance of policy. On that note, I'd like to introduce two very renowned policy experts, Ajay Markanday, who's the Director, Liaison Office of North America for FAO, and John McDermott, who's the Director of the CGIAR Research Program on Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, which is based at IFPRI in Washington. Ajay and John, I'd be very curious to hear your remarks on what we have to do to enable the policy-making environment that can allow for these innovations to be implemented. Ajay, perhaps we can start with you, and then John, you'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good morning to everybody. So as Chris said, I'm the Director for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations based out of Washington for North America, so I cover both the US and Canada. As some of you may not know, the UN FAO is an intergovernmental organization which was actually established about 70 years ago in Quebec, Canada. So, and this year is its birthday, and we have 194 member countries. So our governing body are all the 194 countries. 2013, a resolution was put forward at the FAO conference for a request for the International Year of Pulses. And that went through, so the International Year of Pulses has been declared as in 2016. So the UN will be having a number of events, etc., around the whole issue of pulses in 2016. And part of the discussion that I was having here over the last 2 days is seeing how as an organization, a multilateral organization, we can work with different actors in seeing what we can gear up for next year. I think the point of this particular discussion is trying to go back into this areas of nexuses and how do we work. We do live in a very globalized world. One of the challenges that I think an organization like FAO and other multilateral organizations have been facing is a challenge for food security going into, say, 2050. We are going to have 9 billion people to feed. We have to see how are we going to look at issues of food governance. Now, whilst the earlier declarations on food security, going back to 1973, etc., were very much looking at supply side issues, how do we produce more, I think we're getting a more thorough understanding that we can't just look at producing more without looking at trade-offs. And these trade-offs are largely related to the areas of sustainability. Are farming systems that we are now employing sustainable in the long run? I actually started my career in the CGIAR. I was an economist fellow at the International Rice Research Institute in the early 80s. And even then, I think economists were quite concerned about these trade-offs. Are these sustainable? Are we going to be able to look at changing dynamically farming systems and have the resource basis to continue that? And the reason that I bring that up is that a major trade-off that's now coming up in large parts of the country, and we mentioned India, and I've been working in India over the last 2-3 years, is the issue of marginalization of indigenous crops, largely pulses, in favor of a very high-intensity cereal types of production, rice and wheat. That's had two knock-on effects. One has that large areas of certainly rain-fed agriculture have become less and less acclimatized in producing these crops. The domestic supply has actually been declining over the last 30 years. But it's also had an impact on two things. The nutritional status of particularly the poor, because their ability to purchase pulses and oilseeds, etc., which are now being more and more imported into India, are unaffordable. And the government of India's current 5-year plan on policy is going to focus back onto rain-fed agriculture. So we're going to go back and look at the issues of how we're going to look at different agrological zones and reintroduce the whole incentive structure for the production of pulses. Having said this, there is a challenge at policy level, which is the way that prices are conducted for the procurement of rice and wheat under minimum support prices, which has distorted production towards cereals away from pulses. And I think the reason that I'm bringing this up is that it's incredibly important that if we look into the next 5 to 10 years, production of these crops, the cereal crops, is unsustainable. We will have to work back towards indigenous pulse-based, if you like, lentils, other types of crops, which are far more conducive to those agrological zones and far more water efficient. Having said this, what has happened over the last few years or the last few decades is that we've got a number of supply and demand side constraints which are coming up. Research hasn't kept pace with what is needed in terms of the types of cultivars, varieties, etc. we do. How can policy or research be geared up to looking at water efficiency, water harvesting, drip irrigation, the whole area of that? And then on the demand side, and here I think is the connections, if you like, the partnerships. I think that multilateral organizations, governments, science and technology, and the private sector have to come together is how do we look at demand side issues as well, where I think the private sector has most of the best practices, knowledge of how to do things better in terms of taking things to market. Before I came to DC about a few years ago, I was the director of a division in a unit in FAO, and I'm going back onto the area of partnerships. In Europe, under the European Union, there is something called Horizon 2020, which is founded on the principle of taking research and innovation to delivery. And the current budget under Horizon 2020 is about $80 billion. FAO's partnership on this was multi-pronged. We basically looked at our connections and our relationships with primary research and technology, which are the universities. We looked at our relationship with governments, host and recipient and donor. We looked at our relationship with also institutions and foundations, but also the private sector. And I think this is going to be the future in terms of how we're going to look at innovation and make it into technologies and taking it to delivery. I think that one of the challenges that we face, and Chris has just mentioned that, is that as an intergovernmental organization, the convergence between international and domestic policy is not always easy. I think countries will look at domestic issues and then look at international or the global public good. And it's sometimes a difficult discussion to have, but again, FAO was founded on the principles of intergovernmental platforms where we were able to discuss this. But in these areas, we will really need to look at how some of the convergence will come on looking at the greater or larger global agendas which are coming out of the international community, and there are two that I can mention. One is the whole area of not just food security, but also nutritional security. We've got now cases where whilst we have got growth, economies are growing, there's an inverse relationship between nutrition and growth, which means the poorer are actually nutritionally less well off, better off, if you like. And primarily the reason is access to proteins. They're not getting the ready access because of diversification, and this happens in large parts of the world where these crops or pulses, lentils, etc., indigenous crops have been marginalized. So we need to rethink the way that they have to come back. And the other area is really looking at sustainability and climate. We're living in a dynamic world where things are changing. There's nothing static. And climate is going to have an influence on the way that we produce food. This year, what FAO has been working on with our partners in science and research, etc., is climate-smart technology, climate-smart agriculture. And at the governmental level, the Secretariat for Climate-Smart Agriculture is now based in FAO Rome as of the beginning of this year. And here we're trying to look at our multifaceted work as an organization to try to see two things. One is, what are these sort of innovations that are coming up which make agriculture more climate smart? The other is really looking at how do we take advocacy and knowledge towards policy outcomes, which are equally important. And that's a challenge because it's really trying to get governments to understand as a platform, how should we do things differently? And I think that's going to be a major theme of discussion at Milano this year. It's on food security, food and nutrition security. We, of course, will have the platforms in Rome itself, which are the committees on global food security, etc. And the committee, if you're not aware, are on the Committee of World Food Security, which is based in FAO Rome. It's not FAO, but it's a secretariat, is basically a platform for all stakeholders for discussion. So this is governments. It's going to happen in October, but it happens every year. CSOs, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. And it's really trying to look at how collectively we can come up with our different perspectives to come to areas of getting solutions, including technological and policy solutions as we go forward. Lastly, I just want to say, and I think I liked what the previous speakers had said, one of my particular interests is how do we galvanize the young scientists of today, the young generation. I think the future is theirs. They've got to start understanding how are they going to solve some problems. And I came across a term, I'm sure some of you may know, that the sorts of things we are talking about are actually termed wicked problems. Wicked problems is something you may want to look up at Wikipedia. Somebody mentioned it to me, a young intern, the other day. And these are problems that don't have simple solutions. They're not something that ready-made things can be pulled off the shelf. We really need to galvanize how thought processes go forward. And that's why I'm very keen, and I am trying to establish partnerships with science and academia and research on the one hand. And later this month, I will be, as a prize, we will have an FAO prize with George Washington University out of Washington, which is actually going to be a prize to the top two winners of this, which is going to be on innovation and food. And part of that would be a trip for the SA or the young graduates and scientists to go to Rome and be able to present this at one of the platforms that we'll have later this year. Thank you, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ajay. John?
Yeah. So it would be good, I guess, to understand my remarks, to know that I've spent most of my adult life working in Africa and Asia. And so I'm preoccupied with kind of agriculture and health issues in those regions. And I want to talk to you about kind of how we enable some of the innovations we're talking about from a kind of policy, investment, and public-private partnership perspective, because I think there's some big challenges, but there's also a big opportunity. And the big opportunity is that in the global development agenda, we've made a lot of progress in thinking about human capability, about nutrition, and about health, and how that's driving other sectors. And there's a tremendous commitment right now in the global development community to think about nourishing people rather than just feeding them. And this is a huge sea change that in terms of thinking about people, rather than just commodities and other things, that's very important. Now, one of the challenges we're having in moving this agenda is that policies, subsidies, trade, investment has been all tilted towards producing lots of cereals and getting them out there. And it's really disadvantaged pulses and other kind of diverse foods that we need to nourish people rather than to feed them. So I think that on the overall agenda, that kind of enabling is happening, but it's taking time. And then underneath that, there's some very specific things that we need to do if the types of innovations that people are talking about need to come to pass. One of them is basically on supply chains. And you heard some general statements from USDA on Monday about the importance of markets, the importance of transparent trade, and that's all very true. But the other thing is just the supply chain challenges. And I was really amused listening to General Mills and AGT in the first morning talking about the fragmented pulse markets in North America and comparing those to the incredibly fragmented markets in Africa and Asia, where you've got millions of farmers, not thousands. You've got thousands and thousands of traders, not just a few. And the kind of coordination challenges around those are really going to be required to help innovation. And I think they're going to come from different sources than we're used to in North America or Europe. There's going to be social enterprises, different roles for farmer organizations, different ways of organizing people to make things happen. And that's one of the key challenges that we're going to have to address. The other one in the whole area of trade and markets, and if you think about Africa, for example, which we haven't talked so much about in this conference, there really isn't a lot of trade between African countries. And there's a lot we are working on the policy side in terms of regional trade, trying to harmonize regulations, standardize quality and safety standards, those kinds of things that are very important. And we're working directly with trade organizations, COMESA in Eastern and Southern Africa and ECOWAS in West Africa, and we're starting to make some traction on that. But, you know, that's fine at the kind of policy level, but the day-to-day kind of moving materials, moving foods across borders requires, you know, somebody to get the standards right, somebody to agree that with kind of border officials and things like that. And that's where I think this partnership, especially with the B2B businesses, is going to be very important in the kind of practical ways that you can move things around, and then how we can engage on the policy side to support those things moving forward so that agricultural products can move, that food products can move across countries. Because this regional trade in Africa with 56 countries and all different standards is really an impediment that needs to be enabled if these kinds of innovations are going to happen. The last kind of challenge, and we've kind of skirted around it, but it really needs to be addressed, and Laurette talked about it a little bit, is the need to link kind of business goals and social goals. And there's a lot of discussion about public-private partnerships and how they're working. And, you know, basically they're just picking up some of the small areas right now. I don't think we really have performing public-private partnerships to the extent we need them. Now, there's some good opportunities, and at the global level, you find USAID, you find a lot of the international aid donors, you find WFP are really understanding how to engage with agribusiness to get pulses into these diverse diets that we need to nourish people. And I think there's been a lot of progress there, but how do we translate this down to country level? If you think of a country like India, for example, so much investment in welfare, in social welfare, in programs for women and children, programs for school children, programs for feeding people in general that we haven't tapped into, and where business and civil society and government don't really trust each other yet. And I think there's a lot that business has to offer to this, but showing these concrete cases of innovation that can come together are going to be critical. So I think that's why we're very keen on the policy and enabling side to be engaged in such an innovation platform and an innovation initiative, because we see this as absolutely vital. And you know, at the global level, it's one thing, but what really excites me is the kind of national innovation platforms. And if you work on food policy, if you work on transforming food systems, it's really countries that matter, and each country is almost a unique experience. And so how we get national champions, how we get the engagement across business and society in these countries is going to be the crucial thing to me, and something I'm really looking forward to us engaging in moving forward.
Thank you very much, John. The one area that we haven't mentioned, I think, at all yet is agricultural research. And so I'd like to move back to the farm from policy to introduce Noel Ellis, who's a director of the CGIAR research program on grain legumes. And Noel, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the impacts of some of the innovations we've discussed this session and changing demands on agricultural research.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think I don't really know what the proper term in pulse parlance is for a fish out of water, but that's sort of how I feel here. If you can think of a way of saying that in pulse speak, then I'd be very, very interested. So the CGIAR research program on grain legumes works on 8 crop species, 6 of which are pulses. And I think, you know, our focus, to be blunt about it, we're interested in production. And I guess that means we're interested in what the constraints are and what the limits to production are. Of course, the reason we're interested in this is that pulses are good to eat, and we also think that they have an important role in farming systems, either in relation to soil health or their residues being important in feeding livestock. So we're interested in trying to see how these crop species fit into those sorts of systems, while recognizing that they're not going to do so if they're not economically viable for the farmers that are growing them. So that's the sort of context I think that I'm speaking from. As an individual, my background is really in evolutionary biology. So you can see that I really do feel like a fish out of water here. But I want to maybe try and say a few words about why I think this is important in relation to innovation and in relation to platforms. So I think one of the things we can ask is, you know, why are we here? And I think we're here because of a really great idea. And it was Henry Ford, I think, who was attributed to having said that writing is a systematic method for the propagation of bad ideas. Yeah? I think you can sort of understand what he was getting at. But the really great idea that we have, that is behind why we're here, is something that wasn't written, and it was an idea that occurred to many different people in different places at more or less the same time. And the idea was agriculture. And everywhere that agriculture was invented, there was a starch crop and a legume. There was actually, in Indonesia, there was an agricultural system that didn't really have a legume. And we don't really, Indonesian traditional agriculture hasn't come to dominate the world the way the other agricultural systems have. So why have they done this? Why were cereals and legumes essential for agriculture? And it's for exactly the reason that was mentioned earlier. It's to do with the balance in nutrition that you get from cereals and from legumes, but also because the legumes contribute to soil fertility. And it's a way of bringing additional nitrogen into the biosphere. That's why legumes are important in tropical rainforests, as well as why they're important in agriculture. If you want to increase the total amount of protein in the planet as people, you have to introduce nitrogen into the system somehow. And legumes were the way in which the population explosion of people was enabled. So that's why we're here. It's a great idea. It sort of got lost, and it's got lost really very recently, since the 1940s, when there was another great idea, which was that you could take the nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground directly. And that process has really driven a revolution of agricultural productivity, which has sustained a very large number of people. It has also somewhat marginalized the pulses because, and other legume crops, because the nitrogen can be brought into agricultural systems by different means. But I think we are in a state where we recognize that there is a potential problem there. It's something like about, I think, 2% of the total world energy that's used in producing this nitrogen fertilizer. And it also contributes something between 12 and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. And it's a major remodeler of our environment. You can track the changes in nitrogen residues, even in northern Canada, lake sediments in northern Canada, as a consequence of this process. So we're having a huge environmental impact in terms of agricultural production for our population. And I think there's a general feeling that we need to do something about this. And I guess one of the drivers for me as an individual is that I think that you can really only do this at scale, because it is something that's happening at scale. And of course, most of the people who are engaged in farming, most of the area under farming as well, is people who are living in relatively marginal environments and having great difficulty in making their way in the world and being productive. So I think it's by helping this group that you can achieve two things. You can try to get some balance into the way in which we are undertaking this primary production of agriculture, and try to do so in a way that minimizes the environmental impact of agriculture, and also sustains these people. So I think we need innovation again. We need to try and understand what it is that was the benefit of these two great ideas, the Neolithic one and the one in the 1940s, and how we can take the best of both to try and rebalance our agricultural production system. So I think that's where the platform comes in. It was John, actually, who was saying something the other day about multidisciplinary approaches. And I don't think we can address this problem unless we attack it at multiple levels. And that's not just multiple levels from an academic or agricultural or nutritional perspective. We also have to think in terms of commerce and in terms of how people make their livelihoods. Because if we don't take proper cognizance of this, nothing will happen. I think it's imperative that we bring these different elements together. And so what's this Pulse Innovation Platform going to do? I think it's a very difficult question, certainly for me to answer, and I suspect it's a difficult question for any individual to answer, because the purpose of it is that it is a convergence of different ways of thinking about things. And from that convergence, we should be doing things that we wouldn't have done if each of us individually had sat down and thought about the problem. Right. So it's that I guess, intellectual stimulation that comes from the convergence of different disciplines that I think we can get out of this Pulse Innovation Platform. And I think it's an urgent thing that we need to do in order to achieve the long-term goal of sustainable agricultural production for nutrition.
Thank you very much, Noel. The white shoe mafia is nudging us here, so we'll move along to the concluding remarks. Certainly, Hakan Bahceci is no stranger to this group. Hakan, the floor is yours for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to see the launch of this Pulse Innovation Platform in our convention. Innovation is one thing that everybody talks about or likes to talk about, but actually innovating something is very few know how to make it happen. So it's very special to have McGill University and the PIP members taking this leadership role. It's very important for our industry. Pulses are traditional food, but we also know they are the future of the food. For the International Year of Pulses next year, we are focused on the role pulses will play as a cutting-edge part of the diet, to incorporate peas, beans, lentils into modern food habits takes innovation. We need new ways to use pulse as ingredients, new fractions to increase to health benefits, and new pulse foods. Thankfully, there are signs of progress. For those who listen to Mintel's presentation, we have seen the study shows almost 6,000 new pulse products launched globally in 2014, as compared to about 3,000 in 2011. In India, 50% of these new products were in the snack food category, whereas in the US and Canada, most of them were in meals and meal centers category. This shows true change of our industry. The change we have been dreaming of is in the hands of academics and scientists. With the focused opportunities fostered by Pulse Innovation Platform and others, we see the chance to take academic excellence and mobilize it in the hands of the food value chain. Right from farmers in all parts of the world growing healthier, more sustainable crops, to better processing techniques, to higher uptake by the dietitians, to novel new products on the grocery store shelves. These are the innovations that drive home change to make a healthier, happier world. And while we are talking about the value chain, I want to emphasize that innovation cannot and will not only benefit consumers in developed markets. Pulses are also a vital part of the solution for the world's food insecure and malnourished. Ajay mentioned earlier about the importance of food security and nutrition security. Actually, we recognize the importance of this UN approach in our industry as well, and one of the thematic areas we cover is food and nutrition security and innovation. These all go together. To support this, we are planning a global competition to foster food innovation, including specifically for humanitarian-focused products. This is just one of the examples of the projects where the Global Pulse Confederation is fully committed to work with United Nations and Pulse Innovation Platform and other stakeholders to advance pulses. We look forward to the innovations that platform will create, and it couldn't come at a more welcome time. When the United Nations declared the International Year of Pulse, I challenged the industry to dream bigger. Thanks to Pulse Innovation Platform, our vision continues to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hakan.
All right, I would like to thank Chris and all of the panelists, really, for an outstanding presentation and something to think about for our industry here as we progress in the next few years. All of the innovation and how do we achieve ending hunger in our lifetime and innovating new foods for the entire world to consume.